Welcome to the podcast, Albert.
Thank you, Asher. Good to be here. I was looking forward to it.
For anyone who doesn't know you, who do you say you are?
Uh, Really, probably always start out as just a lifelong entrepreneur, I think is what I relate to the most. I was that kid who, because my allowance was so sparse, my mom gave me 50 cents a week was allowance. I mean,
Oof.
even back in the 1970s, that was not much money. And I just wanted things, so I was kind of just willing to hustle and mow lawns. And I was probably the only boy back then, and maybe that whole decade, that was willing to babysit,
Mm.
for people. I remember, the going rate was $2 an hour, and anything you wanted to eat in their refrigerator. And I mean, I just thought that was a great deal. HBO had just been invented. My mom was too cheap to buy cable, which was
Mm.
only $8 a month, by the way. And so I would go babysit the neighbors, get $2 an hour, put the kids to bed and watch HBO, which was a real thrill.
Wow.
And uh, and just from that point on, I just looked for opportunity. Uh,
Mm.
I just looked for what people needed that wasn't being provided, or what I needed that no one else was providing. And so I just sort of started looking through, at the world like that. It's like, what do people need? What do I need? Why doesn't this exist or that exist? And then trying to fill the gap for myself and, clients, I guess,
Right.
from an early age.
Wow. That's pretty neat. Like, where did you grow up?
In Kenner, Louisiana, it's right under the New Orleans airport. We were directly under the flight path when the planes were coming into New Orleans. If I looked up, I really could see the landing gear, and
Wow.
so we were right on the runway strip, and it was basically what you would call now, yeah, a fairly low class neighborhood. At the time, I had never seen anything else, so I never thought two things about it.
Mhm.
It was only when I went to middle school in a completely different neighborhood that I discovered, quote unquote, rich kids. I was just like, what the hell? Where did all this come from? It's just something I wasn't exposed to.
Right.
And so I really became fascinated by class differences and, wealth and money and the lack of it.
Mm.
It was just fascinating to me. Why do these people have what they have, and we have what we have? And then I guess really almost from a cultural and uh, society interaction standpoint,
Mm.
it just fascinated me how things work, how do groups of people work.
Mm.
Um, I was just interested in the social mechanics of it all, from pretty early on.
Wow. That's pretty insightful of you because, like, I guess from growing up where you grew up, by the time you're at middle school, you're right at that time when you're becoming a teenager. So it's like your body's changing and then also your environment's changing, where you're being introduced to a whole new group of people, a whole new just things you didn't know were possible. Like you mentioned earlier, like earlier you had HBO where like you're going into different people's houses babysitting, and it's like they're living probably differently than you are.
Yeah, and then, they live four houses down.
Mm.
That guy in particular that I babysat for, he was, it's he and his wife, they had two little kids. He was a salesman for Colgate, and so, he had that hustle,
Mm.
he had nice stereo equipment, and really, I think he had a boat, if I'm not mistaken, parked in the garage. He could afford a few toys.
Mm.
Where my stepdad, I was living with my mom and stepdad. My stepdad worked at a hardware store.
Mm.
My mom was a secretary, and they were tight. They could really make a penny squeal. So they were just real frugal,
Mm.
and so we lived pretty nice. Um, on probably not very much money in the day. But yeah, some of my neighbors, they were they were doing well.
Right.
Just a little side note. Yeah, in sixth grade, I was 12 when I went to this other school, and I got really probably my first girlfriend, and she lived in the neighborhood around the school, which was more of a, probably you would call it an upper middle class. And when the summer came around, they had belonged to the local neighborhood tennis and swim club.
Mm.
And I had never played tennis in my life, didn't have a racket or anything, but she invited me over and I went over there. And I remember the thing that was the most shocking was when it was time to eat lunch. We just went up to the snack bar and we ordered what we wanted. And then she just put it on her parents' tab. And I was just telling some people this story recently. I said that had such an impact on me. It's like, oh my God, you could just put something on you could have anything you wanted. You could
Mm.
just say, oh yeah, charge it to my tab. That was
Wow.
mine. That was probably the most mind-boggling moment of my teenage years. It's just like, how does this work?
Right. That
So
is pretty wild.
that's when I was really exposed to just a wow, what a lifestyle difference
Mm.
some people are living.
So I guess would you say you definitely had the entrepreneur bug before middle school?
Yeah, uh, it was just I don't know, inborn. Mainly I probably ripped off my little brother. In the early years. Hey, you want to trade that one nickel for two shiny pennies? I'm being facetious, but kind of like that. And oh yeah, just swindling him out of some change. But
Mm.
we would have my parents would have garage sales every once in a while, and
Mm.
and I didn't really have anything to sell.
Mm.
So I would do things like just go buy a couple boxes of fudge sickles and a small chunk of dry ice, and just sit at the garage sale with an ice chest, and I would sell that while
Mm.
they were selling their things.
Right.
And so it was just always a little bit of that uh, early on. And I did kick in more as a teenager because then, I was old enough to mow lawns
Right.
and, you know, you could get $10 or 15 or maybe even $20 to mow someone's lawn. Okay, now
Mm.
compare that to a 50 cent a week allowance. It was,
Right.
now that was, money you could live on.
Right.
Uh, and then when I went to high school, it probably kicked in the gear a little bit more. And I started looking for things that were easier
Mm.
than getting out there and sweating.
Right.
And that was never any fun. That was almost not worth the money. Even back then.
Mm.
But one day I noticed the school band would members were having a fundraiser, and so they would walk into the classroom with a Ziploc bag full of Charms blow pops, and they were selling them for 15 cents each. And as soon as they walked in the classroom, I mean, before class got started,
Right.
everybody with change in their pocket would just mob these people, and they would sell half that bag, almost instantly.
Right.
So I just noticed, and when I went home, I convinced my mom to take me to the grocery store, and I could buy a bag of Charms blow pops for around 75 cents. And there was, a lot of blow pops in there.
Right.
Bottom line is they were costing me about a nickel each. And so I just got a 1 gallon Ziploc bag, the same as the band had, and I filled them up with, the blow pops I bought at the store. And then I never said I was in the band. I just
Mm.
walked in with the same bag and people started mobbing me.
Right.
And and I could sell about $4 $4 in profit a day. I would usually, which was a ton,
Yeah.
especially for how easy it was. It's
Right.
just yeah, give me one. I'll take two. Give me three, and you could just dole them out. And it went on for a couple weeks. And one day, one of my teachers said, Albert, what instrument do you play? And I said, I don't play an instrument. He goes, why are you selling those? And I said, well, because people buy them. And he says, no, you can't do that. And
Mm.
they sent me to the office, and the disciplinarian said, no, I couldn't sell candy,
Mm.
on school grounds. And really, it was kind of like the first lesson of, man, if you don't, have the government on your side as your partner, it's
Mm.
going to be a little bit more challenging than
Right.
you think, the man came down and
Right.
squashed my entrepreneurial thing. So, I didn't let it get me down. One of the other things that were popular then, I don't know if this went on in your school ever, but it was cinnamon toothpicks. Had
Ooh,
you?
what are those?
And so you just took you just went and got a cheap box of toothpicks,
Hmm.
and you could go to the pharmacy and get concentrated cinnamon oil. And it was the tiniest little bottle. It was barely an ounce. And you just poured the cinnamon oil on the box of toothpicks, and they would just infuse, with it. And you could sell them for a nickel each,
Mm-hmm.
and carry them around in a little brown bag. So it was less noticeable. It was still, a little bit of a hustle. Nobody else was doing it. It was one nickel at a time, but I just wasn't. Once I kind of had a taste for it,
Hmm.
uh, I just really didn't. I wasn't going to just give up just because they were telling me I couldn't. I've never
Right.
really been a rule follower. When you
Mm.
get right down to it, it's like I'm always looking for a loophole.
Right. That's pretty funny. I guess what did those cinnamon sticks do? Is it like just a taste thing or like
Yeah, it was
something
just
neat to
people would
have?
just chew on them and just kind of, kids, that money is burning a hole in their pocket.
Hmm.
Anything anybody would sell, they would
Yeah.
gladly trade for the novelty of it. So yeah, they
Right.
would just buy like I had some little tinfoil wrappers, and if they wanted three, we'd just give them to them in a little tinfoil wrapper, and then they
Mm.
would just take them out through the day and put them in their mouth, and kind of had like a little bit of a burn to it.
Mm.
Um, and again, that probably didn't last long either, but
Yeah.
it'd just be, you know,
But
one one
I
thing
guess
after.
what did it do for you? I guess like having that, it like fulfilled something inside being able to have like a hustle or something to be like, oh, I can make money from doing this or I can like provide a service to people.
Honestly, it was less than that than just like I wanted things.
Mm.
I wanted things, and I would look around, and there was no way for me to get them. There was
Right.
my parents were not going to, give me the money.
Right.
Uh, I remember as I got a little bit older, say 15 or 16, there
Mm.
were some neighbor kids, and for Christmas, they got, a mini motorbike,
Mm.
uh, like a it's like a Yamaha 50 cc, motor. I mean, this was
Right.
incredible. Now at
Right.
the
Right.
time, that was probably a $700 purchase. My Christmas budget was about $50. So
Mm.
it's just like in no realm of possibility what was I ever going to get, a motorbike or,
Right.
anything. I remember, home computers came out then.
Mm.
And the original Apple II came out. And I was
Wow.
in a computer programming class. This is when people were programming computers like in the basic language, and you could buy
Right.
one Radio Shack or whatever. I wanted one of those so bad, Asher. Yeah, I was just racking my brain. How could I, get one of these? It was just really not a possibility. And so
Right.
it was really just driven by wanting things
Hmm.
and knowing that the only way I was even had a chance of getting them was I was going to have to earn it on my own.
Mm.
Now, I never did save up enough, to buy a motorbike or whatever. And the home computer that I did get is when the Commodore 64 came out. It was only $200.
Wow.
And it wasn't quite an Apple, but my parents did give me that one Christmas. And that was probably the best gift I ever had. So it was really all driven out of wanting something
Hmm.
and having no other option but to try and figure out how to get the money,
Right.
so that I could have what I wanted.
I think that's pretty neat because it's like you resorted to trading goods for services versus like, okay, somebody might say, "Oh, I want something, I just go and take it." Like, who's going to stop me type thing. But how come that wasn't your motivation?
What, just to steal it?
Mhm.
Well, I did get busted shoplifting one time, so I guess there was sometimes when I did go that route,
Yeah.
uh, And I'll tell you the story. I don't know if I've ever told this publicly. I normally I would make a speech out of things like this, but I had gone into like a department store, probably like a Kmart or something,
Mhm,
and um, I had had a little electric racing track,
mhm.
where you put the cars on and
Oh,
they
yeah, I
had to
remember
sit
those.
down and do it. And I went into a Kmart and I stole like a car and I
Mhm,
put it in my pocket. Now here's the thing. I left the store and got away with it.
mhm,
And either later that day or something, or maybe right after, I was with my mom and we went into another store.
mhm,
And I had that car in my pocket. And as I'm walking around, um, I don't know if I look suspicious or whatever, but on the way out, the security came and stopped me and
mhm,
then searched my pockets. And I had the car, but I didn't steal it from them.
mhm.
But it really wasn't going to be like a great story. Well, I didn't steal it from you. I stole it from Kmart. You know what I mean? So my mom was with me, so it was pretty humiliating actually. And they said, okay, you're banned from coming in the store anymore. I didn't
Mm,
even throw out my story of it didn't come from here. I guess I just sort of took my lashing there and just said, okay. I think they
yeah,
kept the car, so I didn't end up with the car. I was banned from the store for life. And this is a little side note.
mhm,
To this day, I was probably I could have been 14 years old, 13, 14, 15. When I walk out of a retail store,
mhm.
there's the hair on the back of my neck kind of stands up. It's like, you know, waiting for somebody to come and grab me and say, "Hey, are you walking out with anything?"
Right,
Isn't that a strange punishment?
yeah,
I'm 60 years old. And so for 45 years, whenever I leave a retail store, that's how much that really kind of burned into my experience of just like, I don't want anybody to think I'm shoplifting.
right,
You Especially, now that you can self-checkout,
mhm,
at Walmart and everything. Man, I'm ringing everything up, making sure I'm not making mistakes. So it did
mhm,
stick with me, and I never attempted it again, probably just because of that fear
mhm.
of that coming in. But it really was that desire that you wanted something so bad. Uh,
Right,
I know I really had criminal thoughts as far as how could I get my hands on an Apple II? It wasn't
mhm,
like you could run in the store and run and get one, but I know my brain was working overtime
right,
trying to figure out how could I possibly, find some kind of way by hook or by crook to
mhm,
get one. I never did. It would be college when I bought, a Macintosh Plus,
mhm.
and that would be a decade later.
Yeah, but I guess to go from that experience and maybe some of the experiences you had before where you were able to do a service and then get paid for it and get some of the things you wanted, like, how did that feeling feel to you?
That was good. I mean, really, it's freedom. You
Mm,
know, probably the thing I was into the most was I really liked audio equipment and music, and I know I spent a lot of money on 8-track tapes and
mm,
cassette tapes and albums.
mhm,
Uh, I wanted a lot of, probably that was the biggest splurge that I used the money for. And so, yeah, it felt good to be able to have I want that, and be able to just get it,
mm.
yeah, without stealing it or without having to, ask for it. Again,
Right,
I knew that wasn't going to go anywhere anyway. So
right,
it was no point. So yeah, it was freedom. That's really what I was experiencing, by getting to buy what I wanted to buy. And it
right.
wasn't extravagant. It's probably things too like candy and sodas and
Yeah,
you yeah. We kids played outside all the time then. We would just go on epic bike rides. And so we could go to the convenience store, kind of take a backpack and, go buy some snacks and a drink or whatever, and then
Right.
go bike 5 miles, 6 miles, something like that, and go on an adventure and have our, um, our little goodies with us. It was
Right.
things like that. Maybe that was a total of $3 or whatever, but
Hmm.
um, it was just fun.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that because I remember a good friend of mine I met in fifth grade and we were friends to like sixth and seventh grade. Like coming to America was an interesting experience for me because originally I was born in Cameroon, like West Central Africa, and then coming here at 7, like growing up a little bit in Cleveland, Tennessee, and then from there moving to Dalton, Georgia, and basically going from fifth grade through high school. It was like, okay, like people do things a little bit differently. Like my friend Michael Barnes, he was more outgoing. Like we'd walk around the neighborhood like, oh, it's hot outside, we can take our shirts off. I was always like conservative, reserved, but like you get to do things like cutting the grass. I think my mom kind of pushed me to do that, to be like, okay, summertime, you need to get out of the house, learn to do something with your hands, be active, not just be behind the computer like a little gremlin or whatnot. So,
Right.
like doing little jobs like that and being able to walk over to the Hardee's that was behind our neighborhood and like buy like a milkshake or a burger or something, it felt like so I don't know if it felt like naughty or just felt like, oh, I did this without having to ask for it. Like I worked some, I had some money on hand and I could go over here and buy this. And like we didn't grow up eating junk food. That's why it felt so much more like like a novelty because
Mm.
it's like even going to a fast food restaurant and learning how to order off the menu. Even today, it's like I've gotten used to it more frequently, but there's something in that where you're like hanging out with your friends and you get to share in the experiences and things like that.
It's a treat.
Yeah.
Yeah, now, something that you're saying makes me think about, I think ultimately the I'm thinking in relation to my own children,
Mm,
who they're all now between, 18 and 25. But as a father, my thought is there's really no greater gift uh, than when you get to the point where you can take care of yourself.
mm,
That you have the confidence in yourself, you have the skills, you have the work ethic or whatever, that you can, if you had to, pay your own way.
yeah.
And I think in some sense, what we're talking about here, you going out in the summer and earning your money and be able to splurge on the mo. I think really that's the seed of that. It's like, oh
Mm,
wow, I can do it,
yeah.
on my own. I think if you don't have that, if you don't get to the point where you feel like you get to, I think you're really robbed of the greatest gift.
Right.
But if you know you can take care of yourself, and look, I think it's not easy. As I watch my kids, become young adults and head that way where they're paying their own rent and car insurance and car notes. Man, I
Mm,
have a lot of empathy for them because I realize, man, it's not, it's pretty challenging, to earn enough because there's unlimited amount of wants and
right.
needs on there. Um, yeah, I just, it makes me, it's humbling to just realize, oh yeah, somebody really has to, they do have to work hard to be able to pay their own way in the world. And,
Right.
seeing them do it, it just reminds me of being back in that zone, trying to figure your path out.
Mm,
How am I going to do this? Now,
right.
you said you're an engineer.
Yes.
Uh, so, that probably makes it a little easier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because it feels like sometimes easy is kind of relative because it's even taking the path to become an engineer, just going through the schooling. It's depending what school you go to, whether you go to one of the top tier schools or one of the smaller schools, they have maybe what they call weed out courses or like your calculus, your physics. And it feels like if you really don't have a heart for it or if you're not willing to learn, then it's like, okay, maybe it's not the thing that you want to do. And it kind of separates you from being, do you have any care about this? Or is it just, is this going to be the quickest way for me to make the money I need to make?
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna weed out that. So interesting story is when I went to college,
Mm.
I did start in electrical engineering,
Mm.
and um,
Why electrical?
because it was computers then. It was the beginning of computers, and they
Mm.
didn't really have computer programming courses yet. That was
Mm.
sort of your way, was to go in and learn how to, program just like a chip,
Mm.
that I just remember one of the first projects was you had to kind of draw the diagram for an electric clock to convert the signal into the LED digits on an electric
Oh
clock.
wow.
I mean, because this was really in the beginning of all that coming on board. And, I didn't really, I went to LSU in Baton Rouge, and, it was just the thing that was most tied to, my love of computers.
Hmm.
And, but I was really going to school for the adventure of getting away from home and being totally on my own, having no adult supervision.
Right.
And I was more interested in, you know, the political life,
Hmm.
getting involved with the dormitory, board of directors, and ended up joining a fraternity, and
Hmm.
was more interested in, the leadership ranks and how do you move up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was really not interested in school hardly at all, but after my first year, my grades were terrible, and I had to go see my electrical engineering counselor, and he said, "Yeah, Albert, you don't really fit the profile of someone who makes it in electrical engineering." And I was just like, how dare you tell me that? And I really remember making a vow that I was going to show him.
Mm.
And 5 years later, I was still an undergraduate, and I
Mm.
had to eventually admit that he was right. And that guy was probably so long gone, but he was right. I wasn't going to be the kind of guy to make it in engineering. But
Mm.
to tie it back into the original part of the story, it was about 2 or 3 years in, and my roommate, my college roommate, we had gone to high school together.
Mm.
And he said to me one day, he said, "Man, you know what I miss about you?" And I said, "What?" He said, "When we were in high school, you were always doing all these crazy business ventures and stuff like that. And since we came to LSU, you haven't done any of that."
Mm.
And when he said it, it really kind of stunned me because I had forgotten really about sort of my entrepreneurial interest. I said, "Man, you're right." And what I took away from that, Asher, was that when I went to college, I bought into the whole kind of cultural message there that
Mm.
the way you do it now is you go through these classes and you're going to get out and get a job,
Mm.
presumably an engineering job,
Right.
and you can make X amount of money per year, and
Mm.
then that's how you do it. And
Right.
I totally let it kind of co-opt my own natural, interests,
Right.
and I bought into the system and unconscious that I was doing it. And years later, we talked about it. He didn't even really remember saying that to me, but it had a huge impact on me because
Right.
I remember thinking, "Damn, I really missed that about myself."
Mm.
And I started. It really motivated me to start coming up with crazy ideas again. Some that worked, some that didn't. The first one out the box when he told me that is there was a big sort of a convocation that would happen at LSU, and fraternities would come from all around the country to come to this thing. And I
Mm.
made souvenir plastic Mardi Gras type cups,
Mm.
commemorating the event. And I bought a case of them, which was 1,000. I think the whole case of cups was, maybe 85 or $100, so 10 cents a piece. And I was trying
Yeah.
to sell for $1. And I had them out there, and I don't know. I know I didn't even sell enough to get my money back. And then
Mm.
from then on, I had seriously, it was a kind of a toilet paper size, box full of,
Mm.
plastic cups that nobody wanted to had no use for. So whenever there was a party or something, "Hey, Albert, can we have a sleeve of those cups?" "Yeah, sure, go ahead and get them."
Mm.
And it was my entrance back into thinking like that,
Mm.
and realized that I couldn't let, you know, just myself be, I don't want to say brainwashed, but
Yeah.
uh, just diverted to buying into a whole different system that ultimately wasn't going to be suited to me. So
Right.
I did not make it in electrical engineering. I switched. I only had 30 credit hours to go, to graduate, and you had to
Mhm.
be at your college. You had to get 30 hours in your college. So at the
Right.
last minute, I had been in electrical engineering for 5.5 years.
Mm.
And then I switched the very last summer and fall to
Mm.
end up graduating with a degree in business finance. So,
How much more time did you have to put in to get the business degree?
well, just no extra. I graduated with exactly 128 hours. I mean,
Wow.
somehow I was able. Yeah, I do think it's different now. I think now when you switch, you almost have to start over again.
Right.
But
Right. But
I
it
was,
like a lot of what you already did you were able to
yeah,
just
because
pick it right back up.
I wasn't taking engineering classes anymore, even though I stayed in the college.
Right.
I was taking kind of more what I wanted to take, or
Mm.
English, math, calculus, all the things
Right.
I would have to take anyway.
Right.
And then in the last 12 months, but so I had to admit in the end the guy was right.
It's funny how that happened where it's like he says something that almost like with it not coming from your friend, like where when your friend said it, it kind of hits you differently. But when he said something, it was more of like speaking to who you were and you felt the need to like disprove him. But in going through those next 5.5 years, you still went about it your way. You didn't necessarily follow the curriculum of like
No,
the electrical.
no, I was just insulted that I was really thinking, how can you, it was really like, you don't know me,
Right,
just
right.
because you're looking at this written record, like,
Yeah,
how dare you say you can tell from this I'm not going to make it. But he
yeah,
was, he wasn't he? Uh, yeah, no, I wasn't going to go. I don't think I could have hacked those classes.
yeah.
I mean, I struggled with calculus. Uh, and I had always been really good in math and had
Mhm.
scored high on assessment tests, but there was something about calculus that I just didn't, it just wasn't clicking. And
Right.
so I know I was looking at an F, my very first calculus course, and I dropped it. And
Mm.
then I had to take it. So I took it again, and it was looking like I was going to make a D. And
Mm.
so I dropped it for the second time.
Yeah.
I enrolled in it a third time. And I remember maybe I was about a month in, and then I've already taken it for 2 whole semesters practically. So at least the beginning of it made sense. And I remember one day it just clicked and I go, oh my God, okay, I understand what a derivative is.
Mm.
But it wasn't until the third try. And then as soon as it clicked what
Yeah.
you were telling me, I think I may have gotten a B.
Right.
It's just like, oh, okay. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I couldn't see it in those first 2 times I tried. It just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And
Wow.
then it clicked.
I think that's almost a lesson in learning how to fail properly. Like seeing that something's not working and even going through the process of saying, okay, I'm going to drop this because I don't know if you dropped it before like the drop ad date where it wouldn't count on your
Yeah,
record or
that's
like,
what I was doing.
gotcha.
I was trying to keep it off my record. Now, if the drop date always shocked me that it was only 3 weeks usually before the end of the semester. I mean, you could
Wow.
go pretty far in, 3/4 into a class,
Hmm.
and if you didn't have the grade you want. And that's how I kept from getting kicked out academically.
Hmm.
Uh, is anything that I didn't have a C or better, I would
Hmm.
drop on the drop date. And so there's some semesters I went and I was only getting credit for 2 out of the 5 classes. But
Mm.
but I was making progress. That's
Right.
why 5.5 years I was still an undergraduate because I just didn't get that many I didn't get credit for most of what I had been taking. And it's
Right.
not, don't feel bad for me. It wasn't like I was working hard and I put all the sweat and tears. I mean, many times I didn't even show up, for most of the classes.
Right.
Um, I remember taking an accounting final in a big auditorium where they had three different teachers administering the test at once.
Mhm.
And when I was done, I went to put the test in my teacher's pile, and she was sitting right there. And she goes, "Oh no, you're putting that in the wrong pile." And I said, "No, this is the right pile." And she looked at me like, "You're not one of my students." And I said, "I am. You may not recognize me because I don't come very often, but I look totally unfamiliar to her, you know. It was
Right.
like that's how seldom that I went. But
Yeah.
I chipped away at it
Mm.
until I really my commitment was was um was there. When I finally decided I'm gonna get out of this place,
Mhm.
the whole thing was different. I just attended class every single day. Um, so look, it took me 5.5 years to get 76 credit hours.
Mm.
And then in 12 months, once I had made my mind up that I was getting out, I knocked down 51 hours in, from a January to a December, and it
Wow.
allowed me to graduate. So really that was my education
Mhm.
from college was that. It
Mm.
was just like when you really set your mind to it, when you're really ready, when you really are willing to commit and do the work, I ended up coming away with, well, there's nothing I couldn't do like
Right.
with this level of focus and commitment. And prior to that, I was just, spinning my wheels, making some progress,
Right.
but it was that was my education. Oh, I see. This is how it works. When you
Yeah.
really want to do it, this is what you need. And the other
Mhm.
way is probably not going to work out.
That's a great point. Because for go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
sorry.
I was just
No.
gonna say I left with tremendous confidence of seeing that distinction
Mm.
of how to make it and how you're not going to make it.
Right. And I think it's also good that you got involved socially to where it's like you weren't just you didn't go into like one aspect of school just like you're not really rule oriented into like okay I've got to just follow the rules just keep my head under like keep my head down just do what I'm told and keep going. It's like no that wasn't your thing but you were able to get out of it the experience that was for you.
Yeah, because what I was doing in the meantime, I'll give you an example. I was in a relatively small fraternity. It had around, I'd say around 40 guys in it, which
Mhm.
was, some of them had 200 people,
Mm.
150. So it was pretty small. And
Yeah.
so there was a leadership vacuum. There was a lot of jobs that needed to be done, and there weren't a whole lot of people who really wanted to, do work.
Mm.
So, I volunteered. I was pretty young. Normally in a big fraternity, you don't get a leadership role maybe until your junior year at the earliest in your senior year, because there's a lot of guys that want to do it.
Right.
Well, I was really in brand new almost, and they needed somebody to be what they called the kitchen budget director, which was you were essentially running the food program. We had a kitchen in the fraternity house.
Mhm.
We had a full-time cook who was a paid employee, and her Social Security and taxes had to be paid.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
we had a house mother who sort of helped out with, some of that stuff. But essentially, you had to plan the meals,
Mhm.
uh, make sure that food was going to be ordered. You had to allocate the money during the semester so that you wouldn't run out of money before the semester ended. And, say you're coming and you got 2 weeks to go before finals.
Right.
If you squandered all the money and none of these guys had food,
Right.
right? They were going to string you up.
Mm.
Uh, like you couldn't screw up because you have 40 hungry, 18 to 21 year olds looking for you.
Yeah.
And so it was like running a mini restaurant. And
Wow.
other than the house mother, there was no adult supervision whatsoever. I mean, really, you know, you were trying to figure that out. I mean, and let me tell you, let's say, and I'm just going to use round numbers, okay?
Mhm.
The sort of semester budget to feed that many guys was roughly around $10,000.
Mhm.
Uh, I think 8,500 was the cook's salary and taxes and
Wow.
payroll. taxes. And so I know it seems impossible. How could you feed, 40 people for 13 weeks? I mean, food was cheap. Chicken was 19 cents a pound. So
Mhm.
we would go to the local store and just buy cases and cases of chicken quarters,
Mhm.
a leg and a thigh for 19 cents a pound. It was a lot of chicken. Pretty much you ate chicken 3 out of 5 days a week. So the food was fairly cheap,
Right.
but you still had to spread it out. Anyway, I always wanted to see if I could make things better.
Mhm.
So one thing I noticed was happening is at dinner time, a lot of the guys had girlfriends that were, you know, in other sororities or, just lived on campus. And they were eating dinner at our house pretty much almost every night. Not every
Yeah.
night. They were there a lot.
Right. Right.
And we didn't say, oh no, we don't have enough money to feed you, you can't eat, because it was just served buffet style.
Mhm.
And so, we let them eat, but I am having to buy that extra food.
Right.
Again, food was fairly cheap, so it wasn't that big a deal. But anyway, I started asking the girls, I said, hey, do you ever eat at the cafeteria? Oh no, the food's no good over there.
Mhm.
And so I talked them into switching their meal plan from the cafeteria to the fraternity house, even though they were girls and they weren't members of the fraternity.
Mhm.
LSU didn't really care where the money went,
Right. Right.
uh, and I got six of them to do it, and it was
Yeah.
roughly $400 is what it cost to be on the school meal plan.
Wow.
Okay, so 400 times six was 2,400 bucks. So my food budget went from $1,500
Yeah.
to $4,000. You see, with
That
just these six girls, right?
right.
They weren't going to the cafeteria anyway. And then so all of a sudden, I could afford to buy steaks. Um,
Mm.
one thing they always the drink prior to me getting there was Kool-Aid,
Mhm.
mixing Kool-Aid and water. And so I started buying just gallons of milk and putting them in the again, just a
Yeah.
couple bucks, right? But like, wow, what a treat. Here, you've been
Right.
drinking Kool-Aid for a decade. Now you can have milk. We could have steak night. It was a total game changer. I ended up putting vending machines in there to
Mm.
sell Cokes, and then had another revenue source,
Nice.
to do that. So, I really became a hero,
Mhm.
in a sense, by like, oh my God, like get this guy to take some other office, and so
Right. Right.
okay, the things I learned there, Asher, the real nitty gritty of, how to run a business essentially,
Mhm.
when I was 18, 19 years old. And we're talking about over an annual, it was a $25,000 budget. That was huge.
Right.
To put it all in perspective, I know I'm giving you a lot of prices just because it probably it's crazy for people to hear this.
Mhm.
Full-time tuition at LSU when I started
Mhm.
was $281.
Wow.
That was full-time tuition
First semester.
per semester. Okay, that was in 1981. So I wanted to, put that into perspective, as this, 18, 19-year-old kid, I'm
Mhm.
handling a $25,000 kitchen budget.
Wow.
It seemed like I was dealing with $1 million,
Yeah.
to me. And that was priceless.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, you
and
came from a 50-cent allowance from your mom when you were young, and now you're
yeah, and now I'm
budgeting $25,000.
exactly. And, taking care of, and, my motivation was to really give these guys a better experience. It's just like,
Mm.
hey, you know what? I'm not just going to do what we've always done.
Right.
Like I'm noticing things, the girls there, and like, hey, let's get their money.
Mm.
Uh, and uh, and then people were more eager to be on the meal plan when you actually had good food.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things they would do is they would put all the leftovers at night in, wrap them up, put them in the refrigerator, and
Mhm.
then Friday was leftover day. So you really were only making four meals, and then on Friday you were eating what you didn't eat during the week.
Mhm.
And I felt like I could afford to have a brand new fresh lunch on Friday.
Mm,
So we called it an open kitchen. Basically, if you came home late, or you missed dinner, or
mm,
you were hungry and wanted a midnight snack after coming in from a bar or something,
yeah.
previous to this, there was a padlock on the kitchen door, because they knew people would raid the refrigerator. Well, we
Right.
removed the padlock and just said, okay, this, you can go in and eat anything, any of the leftovers from the week. The
Mm,
only thing you can't do is don't eat the food we're going to need to prepare for tomorrow's lunch, you
mm.
know. And so now all of a sudden you had an open kitchen. It was
Wow.
unlocked. We were trusting you more, and
Hmm.
you could just go in there and yeah, guys are hungry,
Yeah.
dinner was early. It's at 5 o'clock. It's 10 o'clock and people are staying up late night studying. And then they could just go in there and make themselves a snack. So
Right.
it was just one more little thing to make everybody's lives, better.
That's
Um,
that's interesting how it's like you take off some of the limitations and you kind of think differently on the problems, and you have something that does a lot more than it has been doing for people for it as long as the fraternity's been there and like all of that. I've never had a clue what a fraternity ran like, but like you explaining it to me, I'm like, wow, that I can see why people join fraternities and sororities and like what they do outside of the partying. It's like there's the everyday life you have to live and like your house, but your second necessity is being fed, or your first necessity, however you want to put it.
So I always thought about I just think it was an interesting experiment to take a bunch of young people and throw them into this situation where they did have to figure a lot out on their own,
Mhm,
so there was house maintenance that needed to be done. So we had a house director who,
mhm,
had to fix broken toilets, broken windows and stuff.
mhm,
Um, there was a social chairman who had to design and budget the parties and hire bands and
mhm.
uh, um, you know
And these are all students that are
yeah,
assigned these positions.
it's just the undergraduates in there, and and as a group you're deciding, you know, okay, how much are we allocating to parties,
Mm,
and then that person had to decide what we were going to do with the money. Were we going to get bands, or we're going to have a DJ, or we're going to play the radio ourselves, or,
mm,
it was just a lot of decisions that had to be made for the collective enjoyment of the people. And, it's all basically just young, dumb. They just haven't had to do any of this, but
right.
you sort of either prospered or suffered kind of
Yeah.
according to the people you put in these positions, and could they really, do the job? And, they were
Right.
all usually elected. But there were a lot of jobs that were going on in there. And in particular in this group, since it was only about around, typically 35 to 40 people,
Mhm,
uh, most people just want to come show up, come to the party, come eat dinner. They don't want to do any of the,
right.
paid work of running this place. So you can imagine out of 40 people, you'd be lucky if you had five or six,
Yeah.
were willing to really do that part of it. And there was no alumni oversight or
Mm,
anything. Some groups that are better organized and wealthier and have people coming from the outside helping taking care of this. I was so glad I kind of experienced a more ragtag,
mhm,
uh just, hey man, you just had to figure it out. There was no one coming to help you
right.
do it. So I ended up having a lot of those jobs: social chairman, the treasurer, because they knew I could be trusted to get the job done and handle the money well. And
Right.
so, man, it was an extraordinary experience, not only just personally running it, but figuring out, okay, there was other work that needed to be done. The place had to be cleaned up after parties. It wasn't like we were calling a janitorial service to come clean up, the
Right.
next. You had to learn the leadership skills to encourage or, browbeat, whatever techniques you wanted to experiment with. How do you get a group of lazy, you know, teenagers basically to do the work that needed to be done so that we could live in a place that we wanted, that wasn't a pigsty?
Mhm,
Uh, And it wasn't easy, but you had work schedules and then
Right.
like turns cleaning the bathrooms and things like that. But what happens when the guy who's supposed to come that lives in an apartment off campus and he doesn't come for his bathroom cleanup duty, you
Mhm.
know, then the thing stinks and it's a mess and
Right.
somebody's going to have to do it. So all of that, it's how do you motivate people who are unpaid and
Mhm.
inspire them to, hey man, you really need to do your part because of this and that, but present it in a way that they're actually motivated to come
Yeah.
do it instead of just saying, oh, F you, what are you gonna do to me? That kind of
Right.
that was the education.
I think that's amazing because it's like all of that translates into going forward. And maybe if we fast forward into how we met through Toastmasters, we were talking a little bit about it, but like you being based in Baton Rouge, did you stay there from the time you graduated to going on into your professional career?
Yeah, because by the time I graduated, really, I had started a publishing business where I sold advertising to the businesses around campus that when I graduated, I really didn't need to go look for a job. Uh,
Mm,
so I really just graduated and just continued on, running my publishing business. And so I'm still in Baton Rouge. So I've really been here ever since because I rooted in and there was no way to really leave and recreate. It seemed pointless to go try and recreate what I already had, the
mm,
kind of the fledgling enterprise here. I said, well, I'll just build on that.
right.
And the way I ended up in the Toastmasters club was um, I have this rule. I call it the third touch of the universe.
Mm,
And you I know you've experienced this before. Everybody has. It's like something you've never heard of and somebody mentions it, maybe it's a book or a movie you should see or some place you should go.
mm,
And then within a very short time frame, like maybe on in this later in the same week, you hear it again
mhm,
and like, what the hell is this? I've never heard this in my life before. And now in one week, two people have told me about something or other.
right.
Okay. When it happens for the third time, then it's like it turns into, okay, I've got to do this or look into it right now. In other words, it's like, how can I ignore,
Mhm.
something coming into my awareness that I've never thought about before? And it's like boom, boom, boom.
Wow.
So that's what was happening with Toastmasters. I heard like two people mention it
Mhm,
in a very short time. And it had been a while. I had been out of school for, quite a while at the time. And when I heard about it, what I pictured Toastmasters, what I pictured was a group of old guys, smoking cigars, in a smoke-filled room,
mhm,
you know, learning how to give, good toasts,
mm. Clinking whiskey glasses.
Yeah, yeah, like that. And I was like, that sort of my imagination when I was imagining it wasn't really attractive to me. So I'm driving down one of the main streets in Baton Rouge, Essen Lane, and
Mm,
I'm listening actually to like some sort of a motivational tape.
mm,
And the guy in it starts talking about Toastmasters. And I'm like, okay, here's the third touch of the universe, right? I'm like,
yeah.
and so I literally pulled to the side of the road at that moment. And I was like, okay, this, somebody's trying to tell me something here.
Mhm,
I pull over the side of the road. Now, this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but I Google Toastmasters on my phone
mhm.
and it says we meet every Monday night and it gives the address and the address is Essen Lane, right? The street I'm on the shoulder. And I look at the address and I look around where I'm in and I realize it's in the like a hospital administration building. It's
Mhm.
literally right across the street from me
Wow.
when I'm hearing this. And I'm looking at the building and I'm matching up. I was like, oh my God, it's like right there. So this is even more profound. Here I get the third touch of the universe and I look across the street and the thing is, and guess what? It was a Monday.
Wow.
Okay, so in other words, are you going to ignore this?
Mhm.
You know, am, am I really, am I really just going to say, oh, this is just a coincidence?
Right.
So, you know, there's some apprehension and anxiety and, trepidation about walking into a place that you don't know what you're about to walk into. And I think
Mm,
there's a lot of resistance there for going into a Toastmasters meeting,
mm,
especially what I'm picturing. But
right.
anyway, I said, unless I'm totally like full of shit, within
Mhm,
my own self, that I've got to go to that meeting tonight.
mhm,
And so I went home and told my wife what I was doing. And I went back and I walked in that evening. It was just in a conference room, like on the fifth floor or something in that building. And the crowd was not the, big group of overweight, old men smoking cigars. It was really the most diverse crowd I had ever seen. It was young, it was old, it was men, it was women, it was casual people, it was foreign exchange students.
mhm.
It was like the United Colors of Benetton in there. I mean, it was, you couldn't stereotype the group that was
Right.
in. And so that kind of really caught my attention. And then I sat through the meeting and I was just like, oh man, this looks right up my alley.
Yeah.
And one of the guys up there was a English teacher at a local school, and kind of maybe he blew me away. Whatever
Mhm.
speech he gave, I was just like, oh, this is incredible. Like I'm coming back. Like I knew I'd be back the next week.
Yeah.
I think I joined that night
Right. Right.
and said like I'm coming every Monday. It was either the next week or the week after I gave my icebreaker speech. I just jumped right in. And I thought to myself, man, I'm really going to be, good at this.
Mhm,
And I was quickly signing up for my second speech.
mhm,
And, and this is probably the most profound thing of my whole Toastmaster experience happened right in the beginning because, here I was so eager. So, for those who don't know, your icebreaker speech is just a short 4-minute speech where you really just almost like introducing yourself and telling a little bit of your story so that they know who you are. So,
mhm.
that's something almost anyone could do. You know yourself and you would know what you want. And 4 minutes, goes by in a click.
Right.
The your first real speech is a structured speech, and they give you the little instructions on what it is you're supposed to focus on. And it was organizing your speech was the what you had to do. And so you really needed a beginning, an intro, a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. And
Mhm,
I was really super excited about coming back and giving that speech. So I went home and I kind of crafted this speech about a time traveling taxi.
mhm,
And it was going to be like the past, the present, and the future. And I was talking about the message I wanted to say was just like you really have to live in the present, that the past doesn't exist and the future is also in your imagination. And
mhm.
so it was real clever and everything. And I really wanted to impress, my new friends in there,
Yeah.
especially that English teacher that had really inspired me just a few weeks before. And
Mhm,
so Asher, I go in there to give my speech, and yeah, I had practiced it probably 200 times,
mhm,
because I really wanted to make a good impression. And I get up there and I stand in front of the group and I deliver my opening line or two, and then I can't remember the next line. And I'm standing there and everyone is just staring at the new guy, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, where in my brain do I store speeches? Because I am drawing 100% complete blank.
mhm,
You know, I have no, I can't remember the next line. And so there were people in there and they were like, oh, no, it's okay. They're very encouraging. I'm standing up there in front of everybody and I'm just not saying a word. There's probably only 5 seconds, but it felt like a half hour. And so, I don't know if you remember Tammy.
mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Tammy says, oh, it's okay. Uh, you can use your notes.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, like, wow, that is a great idea. Too bad I left him at home.
Oh, no.
I was so overconfident that I didn't even bring my notes. So she says, okay, well, that's all right, just maybe start at the next section. Oh,
Mm,
that's another great idea. And so I say the first line. I actually could remember the first line of the whole next section.
mhm,
And that was it, just the one line. And then I'm back at a blank,
mhm,
right? And so I'm standing up there and I'm thinking, okay, this speech is not going to come out tonight because I don't know where I put it
mm.
in my brain.
Right.
It's like I have no access to it. Uh, and so I had to just go sit down. Okay, now here's something interesting. I'd probably been a member of Toastmasters for the next 6 or 7 years.
Mhm,
I had never ever witnessed anyone else getting up there and drawing a total blank like that. I'd never seen anyone else really give as bad a performance as that, where they just totally forgot their speech, didn't have their notes. Like to me, it was the worst that anyone had ever done, you know.
mhm,
So when I went back to the parking garage and I get in my truck and uh, I see my wife texted me like, "How did it go?" And I said, "I totally choked." You know, and I was kind of laughing a little bit about it, but
mhm.
I know for the rest of the meeting, you ever see a Charlie Brown cartoon where womp 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 womp,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't hear another word that happened that night. I was in such a fog of basically WTF just happened to me.
Yeah.
I had never experienced anything like that before. And I was just zoned out. And
Mm,
so I went back to my truck, texted my wife, yeah, I totally choked. And as I'm driving home, I'm almost home, I'm a mile away from home. The whole speech just starts downloading back into my head, and I could have given it right there
yeah.
from front to back. So here was really what came out of it for me. I thought to myself, if you can walk into this group and you can screw up this bad,
Mhm.
okay? Oh, let me add this one thing. In Toastmasters, when you're finished the speech, somebody has to get up and give a 2 to 3 minute evaluation on your speech. Okay. Okay. Excuse me. Now think about this. Probably my words only filled up 30 seconds.
Mm,
And the guy was my evaluator was that English teacher. So here this person I really wanted to impress has to get up, and I'm putting this guy in a real jam. He's got to give a 2 minute, 2 to 3 minute speech on my 30 seconds.
mm,
And I was like, oh man, I can't believe I did this to this poor guy. Like it was all so terrible.
mhm,
So he gets up there and in the evaluation, he starts just going on, like a true professional. And Albert, I really, like your voice. And I'm not talking about your speaking voice, really. He says, I can tell you have like a writer's voice. And I
mm.
remember sitting there thinking, like, a writer's voice. What the hell is that? Like this sounds so good. I've never heard anyone ever say this. I've
Mhm,
never heard that term before, but I really, that feedback, like I possibly had a writer's voice, something I didn't know about.
mhm,
It was actually just, landing and just making me feel good. And he went on and he said at some point, and look, next time if you want to make it better, hey, don't never worry about, bringing your notes and having to resort to your notes. Like it's totally okay, this and that and whatever. And so he gave a full 3 minute speech on my 30 seconds, and I left feeling good about myself,
mhm.
in spite of being the worst speaking disaster I've ever seen in the chapter. And so when I went home and, they came back and I started thinking about it, here's what I ended up taking away from. I said, if you can go in there and screw up this bad,
Mhm,
and the only thing that happens is, they get up and to the best of their ability, they try to find something good about what you did, you
mhm,
know, and it's totally okay. I say, well, it doesn't really matter then. I don't have to worry so much about performance.
mhm.
Uh, that it really what had occurred to me was Toastmasters is kind of just like a practice arena where
Yeah.
everyone's in there for the same reason, and how good you are, like it's not a contest.
Right.
You're really there in this. almost like an incubator to help you get better. And everyone is really with that same mindset. They're cheering for you. You know, they want you to succeed. They want to help you. They want you to be better for yourself.
Right.
It's really like a selfless thing. And that changed the whole experience for me. I really, I went back the next week when I signed up for my next speech,
Mhm.
a few people gave me like interesting tips and strategies. Tammy, for one, told me, she showed me what she did,
Mhm.
and she breaks her speech down into like a little pictogram.
Mm.
It's like nine little images for
Yeah.
each section of the speech. And it turns out that when you're under pressure, you can remember a picture much, much easier than words.
Right.
And so when I had stored that speech the first time, I just memorized the words. And when you have a lot of anxiety and you're feeling the pressure and fear starts sweeping over you, whatever that part of the verbal part of your brain you're disconnected from, you're going more to your fight or flight mode.
Right.
But in your fight or flight mode, you can still access your visual cortex.
Mm.
And so by having these pictograms, even in a kind of a panic moment, you have a good chance of being able to recall one of your pictures, and then you can kind of pick up where you left off.
Right.
So that really became my strategy, and I still do it to this day. Whenever I'm giving a speech, even if it's a long speech,
Mhm.
uh, Toastmaster speeches, are 5 to 7 minutes. But if I have to speak for 45 minutes, I have an elaborate pictogram
Mm.
uh, that I can fall back on. And so I really, in a sense, became fearless because you know, all of the things I had been concerned with were just immaterial
Yeah.
now. You don't have to worry about your performance there. Uh, you go there and you practice so that when you're actually giving a speech for real,
Mhm.
you have the skill set, that you built up in the practice arena where there's no danger of any harm coming to you, regardless of how good it comes out. And so, man, that was so liberating,
Yeah.
Asher. And I think that's really ultimately what Toastmasters is about. And if people really understand and get that, well, then they no longer have to, it's really the ego is the one that's fearing, it's performance anxiety and all that.
Right.
Yeah, you can just get beyond all of that.
Yeah. I think
Right.
to your point, like in meeting you and meeting Tammy and meeting Catherine, the biggest thing that was the take back to me was like seeing how positive it was. And to your point where you think, man, I completely screwed up. And the first thing that comes out is a compliment, like using the sandwich method, like here's what you did well, here's something you need to improve on, and then here's something again that you did well. And it's like, wow, people do this. I'm not at work. I'm not getting grilled. Like, here's where you suck. Here's where you're bad. Who told you you could do this? Who told you you could do that? It's like you're not getting all that stuff you maybe grew up with. And like just that levity really made it worthwhile. And to your point, I think I came to that same group in 2014. And I was telling you how I commuted 45 minutes after work, kind of like rushing home from work, taking a shower, and rushing up to Baton Rouge once I'd seen what it looked like at a competition over in Lake Charles. And then when I got to Baton Rouge, I was like, I'm over here by myself. Everybody else works. They're older. They have their mobile homes or whatnot, but there's nobody really my age. So I need to start being active as a professional to be like, okay, you have this title of engineer, but in order for you to become more of Asher, you need to develop who it is that you are. Like people can't just look at you as like your title. You've got to be able to communicate, which is one thing engineers get criticized for. It's like you speak so robotically where it's like you feel like you care more about things than you do about people. But it's the truth is we spend so much time as like a civil engineer, everything that we build and help create is in order to benefit people, whether it's roads to get you from point A to point B, water, like environmental engineer, or air purification. The whole motivation behind that is like we're trying to take care of people. Like we build buildings so that people have places to stay and that they don't fall on them. Or if anything's going to fail, you have enough warning time to get out. And what I found myself doing now within the past couple of years is doing the foundational work, which is hilarious, which is it's like every like when you graduate, they call it your commencement. It's like, yeah, you spent it took me 5.5 years to go through college, like going through that process because I transferred from a smaller school to Georgia Tech eventually. And it was like the prestige of it, I didn't think mattered at the time, but thankfully I had an older brother by 11 years. I was like, this will do more for you in the long run than maybe what you're able to see now in the short term. And being able to go back years later and kind of seeing that, okay, like I felt like I got out of a bad relationship when I graduated where I'm like, it just feels like you're just getting smacked around. You go through this class, then you go through that class, like every teacher, every week you got like four tests, four assignments, like everything's like deadline, 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 deadline. But then to your point of like knowing where things matter, knowing like, okay, this is what I need from this class. Like if I ultimately need to get a job, I need to invest the time to learn how to interview, learn how to do this, and eventually like learn how to speak, present, and use words. Like learning to pause was a huge thing. And I was like, oh, these crutch words that you have, you start listening back and you hear like, okay, you use this many likes, you use this many you use so many. And I was like, oof. You start counting things and you're like, oh, okay. Like it makes sense now. And your brain just starts thinking differently. And every time you hear new people speak, you're like, okay, like it can become paralyzing, but at the same time, it becomes empowering where you're like, oh, I didn't know that this whole world is now open to me. And to go from really, I think Toastmasters may have been what encouraged me to do podcasting like in 2019 and like needing to have something that I could do outside of work, which was something creative. Because similar to you, I had a little bit of that entrepreneur bug back in middle school, where it's like I would sell people like stress balls made out of flour. Like I would take some flour from my mom's kitchen and make it out of that. Or when we had a trip to either a band trip because I played the clarinet and the bass clarinet a little bit, and you had to pay for trips. But if you couldn't pay, you had the option to sell candy, and part of that money that you sold would be what you would pay. So I think
Yeah.
maybe I ended up selling like 3 to 5 boxes, and I looked forward to that every year. And I think one time I either ate some of it or I brought it home, and my younger brother ate some of it, just thinking, "Oh, you brought all this
Yeah, free
candy."
candy.
Right. But then it's like having to pay that back and just being like,
Yes.
okay, like maybe I do a little bit of this, but then I like the rules a little bit more to where I was like, okay, go to school, focus on this, played sports in high school. But then I was like, okay, you're going to college. The focus is just do the schoolwork. But of course, you find yourself playing like intramural sports, then frisbee. And then when it came time to graduate, it was like, okay, I think I need to go out into the world and see where all this book stuff actually applies, because I could go on and do graduate school like my siblings are doing, like my peers are doing, but I'm like, I don't get it. I was like where does the rubber meet the road type thing. So it's funny like seeing a part of me and you and vice versa and just being
Yeah,
like, oh
you
yeah,
were
that's why I'm
you
interested
were
in
you were
this.
the competition with the with selling the band candy.
Yeah, yeah.
I never
So
thought about I was
you're a
taking
rival.
money away from that kid trying to earn
But
his band trip.
But I like what you did where it's like you didn't have to ask, you didn't think to ask permission to do something. You did it up until it's kind of told you, ah, no, you can't do that. And it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go do something else. And it's like, I think I may have done it for band a little bit, but then I ended up doing it more so for the engineering group that I did. And that allowed us to go to like competitions in Jekyll Island, learning how to build like a bridge out of balsa wood, or taking one sheet of paper and basically either building the tallest tower that you could build or trying to get one sheet of paper inside a cube to resist up to 1,000 pounds of
Wow.
weight before it's like completely crushed. And it's
Okay.
like if you allow your brain to just be open and not just be, oh, we got to do things this way, it's like the opportunities are just endless.
Yeah, I like that. I can tell you need something outside of just, the basic part of work.
Right. I mean, work is fulfilling
Yeah,
in some
and I'm
sense,
sure
but
you're
it's like,
totally competent. You want a richer experience, more broad.
yeah,
You're not gonna be happy just doing the exact same thing
yeah,
over and over and over. You need some variety.
yeah.
You might be the only engineer in your group podcasting, I'm guessing.
Probably. It's funny because I right before the pandemic shut everything down, I got an opportunity to work with FEMA as a contractor. And essentially, they bring you in for the assignment was in Puerto Rico to look at some of the damage that was done in 2017 by Hurricane Maria. And I think while we were there were actually one or two earthquakes that happened. So then new people were being deployed to try and address that. But when you get into a new group, obviously they go around and they ask everyone like share something interesting about you. And I was kind of ashamed to share that I was doing podcasting because like
As are we
immediately
all.
immediately the first thing people ask you is like, "Oh, where is it? Is it monetized? How much money are you making?" And I'm like, I kind of got into it not with the idea of making it a business, but I wanted to treat it with the same kind of respect and prestige. But like the more I started treating it like work, I was like, no, this is my escape from work to kind of like not be stressed about it. Like, okay, how much money are you putting into this? Like, is it becoming a money pit? Is it starting to create more problems than it's solving? And then there's like that kind of period of like uncertainty, being in a new environment, being around new people to where I was like, do I know what I'm doing? I was like, I recorded 30 episode in like a month or like 3 months from the time I took off of work. Like I went for a month and decided to drive Uber just for the heck of it, get comfortable speaking to people in person to do this virtually. Like I started going through like a motivational book that gave you a page a day from Dennis Kimbrough, and I started reading a page a day, and I was like, okay, I'll read this and I'll put it out, but I'll read it to where it has to be good enough for me to listen back to it, to have it in audiobook form because he didn't have it in audiobook form. And then also I was like, this will either get me comfortable with editing, this will get me comfortable with hearing my voice back, and this will get me comfortable speaking in a tone to which somebody else could enjoy it and be like, okay, I can deal with that. I'm getting the motivation, it's being well read, and it's building my content library. So it's like over the course of a year or so, 365 days, there were 365 recordings.
Oh, and you read the whole thing yourself.
Yeah. And it's like I had things, I had a starting and stopping point and like trying to get into business or like figure out like this person says you should do this person says you should do that. It was like it was like maybe I don't know if it's a rookie mistake where they say, "Oh, here are the guidelines for podcasting." And I think Catherine and I spoke about this a little bit where they say, "Oh, you shouldn't have numbers in your episodes." And of
Mm.
course, I'm numbering every episode because it's like this is August 10th or this is August 11th or this is October. I think I started at like October 4th. And I was like when something gets into your mind, like you talked about the three touches of the universe. How did you what'd you call it?
The third touch of the universe, yeah.
Yes, yes. So it's like if I don't do this now, I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
And like being able to use it during the winter time when it's like harder for me, like seasonally, it just feels like the sun goes away, things kind of shut down, you become more reserved. Like during the summertime, it's like, oh hey, everything's like upbeat going.
You're going
But
into hibernation.
right, right. But it's like I've finally become more comfortable with that to where I'm like, it might be a little bit of depression, but it's like, no, maybe I do need to like regulate shutting down. And it's like if I can do so well with my work and my career that I can put in bursts of energy. So like for podcasting, I'm thinking, let me record 3 months at a time. Or if I can record what I need in 3 months for a year, I'll explain it to the guests and be like, okay, hey, you're at the beginning of my 3 months, so this is going to come out sooner
Is
versus this is going to come out later.
and now is that the format you follow now? You do them
Yeah.
all?
Well, I
Okay.
mean, like I started recording here recently in July. I think I took off 8 months from like October just because like I felt like too many things were
Well,
going at a time and I just
I
needed
would,
to pull back.
yeah, I would see that you're not going to get burnt out. And when the season comes up, recording season, you're probably fired up about it as
Yeah,
opposed to like, oh God, I got to do
right.
another
Because
pod.
that's one of the things that kind of frustrated me where it's like I wasn't sure if I was getting upset with myself or upset with the guests and I was like that that kind of sucks if I'm asking someone to take the time to speak to me and then when I'm trying to like engage with them like my mind is just like mad, angry, like why am I doing this? Like what was I thinking? All the doubt kind of creeps in like we were talking about you getting ready to give a speech after you've given so many and you're like why did I do this? Like, what was I thinking? And like all the doubt starts to like just come back up.
Well, like I coached a mastermind for a year. It was something I was, like selling basically as an experience. You would come to my 4-day retreat,
Mm,
and then after you left the retreat, uh, I used to just, because the fun part for me was doing the retreat.
mm,
Yeah, I kind of would just abandon these people, throw them back out into the world after sort of helping them transform during this intense weekend.
right.
And then at some point, I was like, oh man, I'm not really doing these people a service by just, you know, casting them back to the wolves.
Mm,
That I should have like a post-retreat support, thing, which would be a weekly Zoom call for an hour, just for everybody to check in and sort of keep going on the mission, whatever they had chosen for themselves. And
right.
so, I set it up as a 1 year experience. So we would meet 50 more times. But
Mm,
I found at some point it was just like, oh man, I would dread it,
mm,
the hour and day of it coming up again. Now, here was the weird thing, then say maybe at the 6 month, 7 month point, I was just like, oh God, I don't even want to do this anymore. But I already collected their money and I told them I would do it for a year. After each of the 1 hour Zoom calls, I personally was uplifted and
mm,
felt good and productive. It was just like really the anticipation of it was
right.
became so routine. It's just like, oh God, I don't want to do it. But
Yeah.
after I would do it, and at some point I realized that happened so many times. I started telling myself, well, I know you don't want to do it, but man, you always feel so good after. So just get on that damn call. And of course,
Yeah.
I'm gonna show up. Um, but I do think things have to be tailored to suit you, like you're
Right.
talking about seasonal. So then I started thinking, yeah, I should just do it for 6 months,
Mm,
6 months, and then it's over.
mm,
And then, I know there's an end to it instead of
right.
just the year comes around and we start a new year.
Right.
So I think you have to be enthusiastic. If you lose the enthusiasm for it, then there's no point in doing it.
Right. Right. And I think that's one of the things I made peace with where it's like I didn't renew the website maybe in like November. So like here recently I've recreated the website. I kept the domain thankfully, but just making peace with like, okay, maybe I don't record anymore or I don't put out any more episodes. But like even hearing from my mom and like kind of being encouraged, like, hey, if you start something, it's good to keep it going. And I was like, yeah, mom, I know, but I really don't. I was like, I didn't know how to tell her I didn't feel like it. And I mean, it's like maybe I just came out and told her that. But sometimes it's like, it's two things can be true at the same time. You might not feel like wanting to do something, but if you put better parameters on it, like you said, that suit you,
It's got
then
to, it's got to be in a way that I like to think of it as that it has to be energizing.
mm,
If it's draining, then to me it's out of alignment, and
right.
that it needs to be tweaked. It doesn't necessarily have to be abandoned.
Hmm.
Uh, have you ever heard of a assessment called wealth dynamics?
No.
So it's like, there's a million of those kinds of things, but it doesn't ask you that many questions, maybe 30 questions. And
Hmm.
when you get finished answering the questions, it comes back and it sort of tells you where you fit in these 8 archetypes.
Hmm.
Um, and the thing of really the underlying frame of it is for each archetype, there's a certain surest path to wealth.
Hmm.
And so it lets you see that since there's 8 different kinds, right? That for whatever your typical sort of your makeup, right? There's a better way for you to pursue wealth than if you're a different type of person. And it's really getting back to what we're talking about. In other words, it's aligned with what you're naturally interested in and your skills are and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I give you an example to make it a little more concrete. Um, if you think about a clock, right?
Hmm.
At the 3 o'clock position, the person like is a real people person, and it's called a supporter.
Right.
On the opposite side at 9 o'clock, the archetype there would be uh, somebody who's really would it's not a people person. They
Hmm.
would prefer like being in a room by themselves with a computer. They're like
Hmm.
data driven.
Right.
Okay. And then there's everything else in between, at the top, um, the person is a creator, and
Hmm.
that person is just interested in ideas. And then at the very bottom, that person is interested in concreteness,
Hmm.
uh, uh, hands-on kind of thing, not
Right.
ideas. And so you can take these 4 sort of east, west, north, and south and blend them to be, somebody kind of in the upper right corner would be a creative person who sort of likes people, and
Hmm.
that would likely be somebody who would want to be a public speaker, on the
Right.
stage, creating speeches and, for the purpose of helping people. There's sort of a mix in it.
Hmm.
And really what I ended up getting out of it was this. In other words, it said, think of like if you're an accountant
Hmm.
that doesn't like people,
Hmm.
you just really, you want to take their tax records in a bag and you just want to punch it all in the computer and analyze it and analyze the data and everything. You would be on the far left at the 9 o'clock position.
Hmm.
And if you had to deal with people, and maybe you have to do it a little bit somewhat, but if your job entailed dealing with people half the time, you would not enjoy your job.
Right. Half
Okay.
the time at least.
Yeah. And then if you were a person at the 3 o'clock and you were a supporter and your job entailed like filling out forms and having to punch everything in to create all these metrics,
Right.
probably would never get any of that stuff done. You would you'd be the person that the boss is always saying, "Hey, when are you going to get your report in?"
Right.
And that person, they just want to be out there, engage with people, It's
Hmm.
because of what they find energizing,
Right.
you know. And so the whole bottom line was you had to see where you fell, in the circle and make sure that the things that were part of the job description aligned with your own, proclivities so
Right.
that most of the stuff you did was energizing.
Hmm.
Because if it was draining, you were going to do the bare minimum or you were going to be bad at it or you would just not really come across as super competent. But
Right.
that there was something for everyone because, if there were jobs, so, obviously I'm on the people person creative side.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would be least likely to get the detail work, done. Um, and if, there was a job that was all detailed, you might think when you're one archetype, like, is there anyone in the world who would ever enjoy this job? Or how am I going to find somebody to do this, detailed grunt work? But the
Hmm.
truth of it is somebody who's aligned like that,
Hmm.
they're so grateful. They can't even believe they're paid, to just get to put stuff in the computer all day long and study analytics and everything and not have to deal with anybody. That
Right.
person's thrilled beyond belief, you
Yeah.
know. So the whole idea was you do what you're aligned to, and if
Mhm.
you're in a business or you're working in it, you find the people who are at different points around the clock face
Mhm.
that the part they're contributing is they like doing it.
Right.
Which
Right.
you can't imagine, but they are enjoying doing it. And so everyone is doing what they're aligned to do. And when they're doing that work, the energy compounds, like they're energized by it. So it
Right.
doesn't feel like work to them.
Mhm.
And if you're in something that's not quite right, you're gonna be drained by it. You're gonna find yourself resistant to it. You're gonna procrastinate on it. But it's a sign to kind of pivot a little bit and
Right.
either subcontract those things or hire a different kind of person or find a different kind of partner,
Mm.
who that makes sense. Um, and it's a great lens, to analyze things through because it is possible to just do things that energize you and then yeah, you never mind.
Right.
And so where would you more likely be successful if you're spending your day doing things that are energizing and you want to do more of? If you're
Right.
being paid to do it, which one do you have a chance at earning more, getting better at, getting deeper into, becoming more of an expert? It's
Mhm.
something that, you're excited about. Uh, and so I like to use, and what you reminded me of is when, you got to the point where you weren't enjoying it. I do think it's a sign that we should pay attention to
Right.
that we are out of alignment
That's a
and
great
we
point.
and we should shift a little bit so that we can do the part we want to do and not do the part we don't want to do. You know what else it's great for? If
What's
you
that?
have to hire people.
Mm.
Um, when I was sort of into that, assessment,
Mhm.
I was trying to hire a salesperson. And I ended up talking to him. It was a guy who had just graduated, and I wanted him to book speaking engagements for me.
Mhm.
And so this young guy, he needed a job and everything. And I gave him the assessment, and I think he just wasn't really a people person. I forgot
Mhm.
where he landed on the thing. And when I got his results back, we had a conversation. I said, you're not really interested in this job, are you? He goes, and I sent the results to him too, so he
Mhm.
could read them. He said, no, I'm not. And uh, I remember thinking, look at all the time and energy I've saved of having to train this person and try to get him on what I want to do, when it's so unaligned with who he is that
Right.
he's never going to stay. He's
Yeah.
not going to enjoy it. He's probably not going to do it. He's not going to do it well.
Yeah.
And I'm sparing myself and
Mhm.
I'm sparing him from feeling like a failure or he can't keep a job or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly which archetype he was, but I said, you know what, you need to go find something like this. And
Yeah.
he agreed. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, and so I had a tenant. He was a client, and he was that detailed analyst quant type person, and he's a
Mhm.
real estate agent,
Yeah.
a real estate brokerage. You might know him. Do you remember Matthew Laborde
That
from?
name sounds
He
familiar.
was in Toastmasters. I don't know if he had gotten there when you were young guy, real go getter. He was one of the top producing commercial real estate brokers in the state of Louisiana, but at
Wow.
23, 24.
Wow.
And so he opened his own office. He rented a space from me and he was really ramping up,
Mhm.
And so I was into this wealth dynamics thing and I give him the test and that archetype, the detail person is called a Lord, Lord.
Mhm.
And I knew he had 4 computer screens on his desk. He was looking at maps and analytics and everything. And so I go, he's up and running and he's got, 3 other agents he hired and I go in there and I'm asking him, hey, you want to test all these people. And so we
Right.
give them all the assessment. Okay, and guess what? They all come back as lords. So every person in the company is the same archetype. They love data. And so I asked him, I said, well, who's like the people person that's, going out and making deals and shaking hands and networking, and he said, no one, they're all sitting here behind the computer. We're all sitting in here behind the computer. Now he did some of that other stuff just because he had to, right? To
Right,
keep
right,
the whole thing going. The problem was, he was really just hemorrhaging money, paying all these salaries, and no one was out mixing it up with the people.
right.
So when he got the results back, the takeaway, I'm saying, look, you're a lord and you're a successful, commercial real estate broker. And so
Mhm.
when you're hiring people who are just like you,
Right.
right? Because that's what you think
You
makes a
need.
successful real estate broker.
Right.
I said, but no one in here has any balance, for your organization. You need some backslapping, people loving,
Mhm.
to go to networking events and who think that's fun. Like I get you do it because you have to, but you don't think it's fun. You want to sit here in your office and look behind the computer screen. So
Right.
I hate to say for those three people, they all lost their jobs.
Mm.
And he went and hired, and he would administer that test and get supporters and stars and some of the other archetypes, and then he took off.
Yeah.
And so it was really an illustration, and like, wow, how powerful it is to have the right mix of people.
Yeah.
But typically people default to assume everyone's like you.
Mhm.
It's hard to really get out of that mindset of like, isn't everybody like me? Well,
Mhm.
the truth is no, but
Right.
it's hard to see like that, you know. But people are different, and they are willing to do things and like things that you couldn't stand.
Mhm. That's such a great point, and you just mentioning this test makes me wanna look into it because it feels like my third touch, so to speak, because in getting around I think from the time I joined Toastmasters 2014, 2016, I really made an effort to get around more entrepreneurial type people to just
Mhm.
break up the monotony of like career-based corporate because it's like I like the structure of corporatization, but sometimes it's like when you get into the bureaucracy of things and you see like you're kind of watching like a train wreck about to happen and you're like, okay, you did like you kind of keep doing the same thing over and over and then like for myself personally I try to analyze like okay am I costing the company more money or am I an asset or am I becoming a liability? And one of the things that I was introduced to um, through one of the groups that I joined, which was Breathe University, and I think one of the gentlemen in there he was a project manager and he did this disc assessment. But the way that he did the disc assessment was that he assigned animals to the different categories. So, like with the disc, you have the DISC.
Yeah,
And with the D, he described it as like a gorilla. So, like if you were the gorilla type personality, you have like that strong, bold, driven person that's like very business oriented. And then with the I personality, they looked at the flamingo, which is like the butterfly, the like they walk into a room, they dress a certain way, people are attracted to them. They can be introverted at times, but they can also be extroverted. Like they're energized by being around people and doing things for people. And then
right,
you have the S, which would be your chameleons, which is like they're very flexible, they blend into different environments and they're very support heavy. They're always willing to do like the underground work nobody would necessarily see. And then you have your C's or your turtles, which would be the people that are very conscientious, rule oriented. They follow like the cross the T's, dot the I's. They look at the data and different things like that. And it was like a game changer whenever he said it because I'd taken the assessment for my first job out of college and they didn't really explain it or break it down, but he went into it doing like a 30 to 90-minute consultation to say like, okay, this is how like your organization looks, or this is how your family looks, or this is how your group looks, or like if you're in a relationship with somebody else, it's like this is why the opposites may be attract. But then going from that assessment to something somebody else called advanced insights, it's like it would take the disc as like a balloon that you'd see kind of like floating up into the air, and then they would tie it down into your values to say like, okay, part of the reason you show up in the world like with a strong D, I, S, or C is because you're motivated by aesthetics, or you're motivated by how something functions, or maybe you're motivated by money because you want the end result, or you're motivated politically because you like to interchange with people and things like that, or theory is something that's interests you because you like to know how things work, you like to like dissect things. So then it almost it almost shifted things a little bit to be like, okay, just because you're one way in one environment, it doesn't mean that that's not the totality of who you are as a person. And then looking at the attributes, it's looking at how you show up in the world, whether you think with your head first, your hands, or your heart. And then it's like you start mixing and matching those. But to your point, when you start looking at the wealth component, it's like, okay, we can talk about this behaviorally for a person, but it's like, now where would you rather spend your time, or where would you spend your time doing something that you enjoy that also brings you a profit to where it energizes you? And it's like, if you know these things about yourself and about the people that you work with, you're not beating your head up against the wall, asking
Yeah.
someone to do something clearly they don't want to do or they're not good at.
Or ask them in the wrong way.
Right.
Sometimes it comes down to that. Yeah. Well, the big takeaway from I guess the promise of the wealth dynamics is it doesn't really matter what type you are, there is a path for you.
That's what I love as well.
You know what I mean? When it comes down, and part of the thing when you go do it, even before you take the assessment, I think they give a lot of examples about famous people
Mm,
and show you what archetype they were.
mhm,
And so they're mentioning people, and you can see, oh, like all these people are well known for being wealthy,
mhm.
but they each had a different approach on how they got there, and
Right,
it didn't stop them from achieving it.
right.
So
And
I
I
think
guess
it,
it go ahead, sorry.
I think it's about $99 to take it. Sometimes you can get a coupon somewhere for percentage off, but
Okay.
I think it's simple,
Yeah,
sort of like what the person did where it broke it down to the gorilla and the flamingo. To me, if it's an assessment that's so complicated that you can barely understand what you are, much less how does it mesh with dealing with other people, then I don't think it's a great tool.
right.
It's too hard to understand.
Mhm,
Um, the wealth dynamics uh, is it's understandable. It's relatively simple.
mhm,
Uh, you know, people, not people, ideas, concrete,
mhm.
and that's just such an easy thing to understand, and it's such an easy thing to recognize when you meet someone. It's like, oh, okay, they're not a people person.
Right, right.
You
And I
know?
guess kinda going back to the disc is that, like, the I and the S are the people oriented, and then the D and the C are the things and idea oriented.
Yeah,
And then it's like it's interesting how they mix in that quadrant again, like we talked about with the clock.
yeah, I just think it's great to really understand. Yeah, everyone, there's so many. We're all different, but not all different. That there's 8 billion types. We do fall into buckets,
Yeah,
even though we're all pretty unique. Um,
I think
yeah.
that's a great point. I I feel like I've kept you for a long time, but I appreciate you taking the time to really talk with
No,
me. This has
no, I
been
love doing
energizing.
it. Yeah, and I don't know if the format's too long. And if nobody wants to,
I
I
love
don't.
this format. I can always
Okay, I
break it
don't.
up and we'll
Yeah, I
figure
don't
it
know if
out.
anybody else like, oh my God, look how long this is. No, I'm good. Too long, don't watch. Um, but I do like I love doing it.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on your book before you go?
Yeah, I'll just give you a brief overview. And look, I'm happy to come back. It's going to come out this later in the fall.
Okay.
So uh, if you think it's worth it, I'd love to come back and get more into detail. But
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll give you the brief overview. It's called "What's on Your Back Burner,"
Mm,
and the subtitle is "How to Use Dormant Desire to Relight Your Fire." Uh, it, and so what I'll ask people is, hey, what's a project or an idea or a goal or some kind of initiative that you've thought about and had an urge to do at some point, or maybe you might even be engaged in it now or, dabbling in it, but that for whatever reason, you've really just never got it going, you never completed it, or you've struggled to get traction on. But in spite of that, and in spite of how long maybe it's been on your back burner,
mm,
it's still there, and it's there in the back of your mind is something for whatever reason you just don't have an inkling or an urge that you still believe it's something you want to do, right?
right.
So that's the dormant desire. And so, it's like, why is that there? Why would something be there? Maybe you've even given two or three runs at it and didn't work out or didn't really go anywhere, but yet it still exists, on this really just this low, simmer, which is barely a flame of hope keeping alive.
Mm,
And so the book it's a process that I was using at my retreats, that I had developed. It was things that I had done like this part, that part, and that with other practitioners and things.
mm,
And one day I just had an epiphany of like, man, if I combine this with this and this, uh, I think that would be like a powerful cocktail
mm,
of to really tap into what's the source of that dormant desire? Why is it there, and what is its purpose? Uh,
mm,
and essentially, really it comes out to it's some sort of a buried calling. It's something that's calling, and it doesn't go away because there's something in there that wants you to do it, that you want to do it.
mm,
So what my process is the first phase of it is really quick, where what I end up showing you by making this quick little list is that there's a part of yourself that doesn't want it to happen.
mm,
And it comes from a subconscious conflict. And so there's a part of your subconsciousness that you're not aware of that doesn't want to do it. So even though consciously you might say, I want to do this, and I want to go, I want to pursue this. Um, you just never really take the right action or have the level of commitment that you need to really get it going and build momentum. And the reason you don't is because there's a counterbalancing aspect of yourself that doesn't want to do it. And I remember reading the Tony Robbins book. He said, if there's something in your subconscious that doesn't want to do something, no force of will is going to be able to overcome that. Your subconscious will win, and you won't make it happen. And so what the book is, it's a three-phase simple process. First, using this list, and then identifying this subconscious character that doesn't want it to happen. And
mm,
then in the third phase, it shows you how do you come to resolution with this part of yourself that doesn't want to do it. So where you really decide, is it something that I do want to do and that I can do, or is the truth of it is I really don't want to do it?
mm,
And then you can kind of settle it for once and for all. Uh, Now, in most cases, people really do want to do it, but they just have the subconscious obstacle that doesn't want them to do it. And so then they don't do it and they just blame it on other reasons like, well, I don't have the resources, I don't have the time. You have
mm,
this long list of plausible reasons you haven't done it. But the truth of it is it's a internal conflict that has to be resolved for you to make progress. So I'm just going to give you the brief story personally that where this was really the having the biggest impact in my life.
mm,
So I was 36 years old. I had graduated from college with that publishing business, and I was doing that publishing business from the time I graduated into my mid 30s, and I was really not making much of a living. Maybe I think the most I ever made was between 25 and $30,000 a year. And you know, it was good enough to pay my rent and the basics, but it wasn't, didn't leave any extra. It was kind of a bare existence, you know.
Right.
At 36, I was married. My wife, we just had our first child, and I knew that I didn't make enough money to support my family properly, especially with, you know, a new baby.
Mhm.
And so I was doing this subconscious conflict resolution that I had, it was a Tony Robbins 30-day tape course. And what bubbled up in his method was that when I was around 10 years old, my father was a bartender in the French Quarter. And my parents were divorced, so we would go spend the weekends with him and back during the weekends with my mom. But when we went to my dad's house, he didn't get off till, you know, after midnight. So we got to stay up late and wait for him. And when he would come home, he just told my brother and I the story. And I never thought two things about it really, but it's a story he regularly told. And he would say like, man, you know, in my bar tonight, it was all these business owners. They own hotels downtown New Orleans. You know,
Mhm.
they're in there and they're rubbing elbows with the councilmen and stuff, trying to get special favors and stuff. He says, but you know why they're in my bar on a Friday night instead of home with their families? He said, because their families can't stand them. Their kids hate them. Their wives loathe them. And that's why they're in there at a bar drinking, you know, on the weekends instead of being at home. So that was really the whole part of the story, right?
Mm.
And here I am as a 36-year-old man, you know, business owner, not thinking that story would have any effect on me, you know, 20 something years later. But
Right.
what I realized by doing this exercise was there was a part of me consciously, I wanted to be wealthier and I wanted to be successful. But yet there was this other character trait that had embedded itself by virtue of the story that my dad was telling me, that if you became successful, your wife and kids would hate you.
Mm.
And, you know, really, you know, the goal for becoming wealthier was to take better care of my family. But the conflict that if I did it, I would destroy the connection, which was really what I was longing for by
Mm.
having the family in the first place. And so you can maybe see how dynamically, are you really going to go full bore and do what you have to do to become wealthy when subconsciously you believe it's a path to destruction?
Mm.
Okay, now I wasn't aware that this was going on. Okay. And this is true for everyone, everything you do, all the dormant desires that are in there. The real reason you haven't done it or to the level that you want to do it is there's always a subconscious conflict of some part of yourself that doesn't think it's a good idea,
Mm.
but you're completely unaware of it. So you can imagine if you don't address this, what's going to happen? You're never going to do it well. And
Mhm.
the reason you think that you failed at it is completely false.
Mm.
It's not because like you don't have the resources or you don't have the time or you're lazy or you don't have the skill or you're not smart enough. That's things we tell ourselves, right?
Right.
And it seems believable. Well, maybe all that's true, and that's why it's just not meant for me. When the truth of it is, the only real reason, if you want to do it as bad as I'm saying that it's remained on your back burner, I know for sure now because I've been doing this, you know, taking people through this process for years now. It's always a subconscious conflict, always. And it can be quickly revealed, like in 10 minutes.
Mhm.
So when I do the process, I'll do it in a group, I'll do it online in groups, and people write down their list, you know, the way I tell them to do it. They are
Mhm.
stunned because when you get in the right mindset to answer the questions the way I want you to answer them, they bubble right to the surface, and you're looking at them, and you're just looking at them, going like, I can't believe this is the reason.
Right.
Just like I was saying at 36, like, I can't believe this is the reason. It's because of a story my dad told me when I was 10 years old. Like, this is ridiculous, right?
Right.
But in order to resolve that in the case of my family would hate me, Tony Robbins' method was to go kind of and refute the sort of the story you had told yourself.
Mhm.
Uh, at the time, my back burner idea was I had always wanted to get into real estate, but it takes money to get into real estate, and there's a lot of ways you could talk yourself out of it. I'm not ready. I don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
I was on a mission to basically get into real estate. I felt like that was going to be my path, and I needed to do it. So I started reading the Tony Robbins book in April, and in December, it was December of '99. I was pushing my little girl down my street in a
Mhm.
stroller. She was 2 years old, and I saw a guy with a duplex, and it had a for sale by owner, and he was out working in front of it. I asked him what he wanted for it. He said
Mhm.
40,000, which I said, wow, okay, that's pretty damn cheap. Like, how bad could I go wrong, on this?
Mhm.
I called my realtor and I said, hey, would you just go look at this thing? It's pretty cheap. It's in bad condition, but he's got tenants in there. And she goes and she noticed that he had the one next door for sale. And she said, well, I really think you should buy both. I know it's not what you want to hear. The other one was 80,000. She
Mhm.
said, but if you buy the first one and you let somebody buy the second one and they don't do a good job with selecting tenants, she says, you could do the best job in the world and you may not be able to rent your units because of whoever they rent to next door.
Mhm.
And so I had just bought my house the year before, and I had put everything that I had saved up for the previous 6 years as the down payment. So I was broke again.
Mhm.
I took out a home equity line of credit for $30,000, which allowed me to put down 20% down. It was 80 and 40, that was 120,000. I needed 24,000. And then I had enough left over for the closing costs.
Mhm.
And I bought the duplexes. So, 40,000 was pretty cheap. My note was only $199 a month. And I went in and I fixed them up myself. I was doing the work myself, and I rented them for $550 each. And so in that one building, I had 1,100 coming in and my note was only 200. And then I had the one next door, which wasn't as profitable, but it was still extra. The bottom line was, by making that move, I had around an extra $1,000, $1,500 a month coming in. And remember, I was only making, you know, 25 grand a year before.
Right.
Now all of a sudden I have like an extra 1,000 a month. That it was like boosting my income by 50% with this
Wow.
one deal.
Right.
It was actually like a lifestyle impact. It was a change.
Mhm.
And uh, one of the other stories my dad and my grandpa used to tell me was they were just anti-debt people. My grandpa was a waiter at Commander's Palace in New Orleans, and he paid, and my dad, they saved up and they paid cash for everything. They never had any debt.
Mhm.
And so I had this kind of averse feeling for debt as well. So here combined with no debt and, getting rich will destroy my family.